Battlefield is back. Let's go, ladies and gentlemen. Battlefield 6 is something I've been really anticipating for a while now. Grew up playing like 1942, Bad Company 2, which is my favorite one. A little bit of 3, a little bit of 4. 2042 was a big disappointment for us all. So we're excited here to finally get an amazing game so far. And we're excited to do a best settings guide for Battlefield 6, along with Windows, Nvidia control panel, and even Discord. So make sure you stick around. If you guys haven't yet, please do me a huge favor to support the channel. Drop a comment, like, follow, and subscribe. We're live over on Twitch and on YouTube, and soon to be TikTok as well. As we get started here, if you do have any questions, please make sure to post your PC specs in the comments. I'm always happy to provide some technical knowledge. Let's figure out what issues you are experiencing and solve it together. I also want to give a very huge shout out to our biggest channel supporter who is making all of this possible. He's been extremely generous over the years, GorfDenroh. Make sure you guys drop a comment in there. Give him a special thanks for being an amazing, generous person. And let's get started. All right, the first thing we're going to do is disable high precision event timer in Windows. We're going to do this by right-clicking on the start menu down here at the bottom. This will be the same for Windows 10 and Windows 11. Select Device Manager. This window here is going to pop up. We're going to click the chevron here to expand it. Go to High Precision Event Timer, right-click on it, and hit Disable. You're going to get a pop-up here, and you want to click on Yes. Next, we're going to open up Task Manager by right-clicking on the taskbar. Click on Task Manager and select Startup Apps. Essentially, all of these should be disabled unless you know what they specifically do. I use Steam a lot, so I have that one as on. But if you're using any software like Adobe or even Discord, you don't need to have this running when you first boot up your computer. It slows everything down or may turn on applications to run in the background that you may not be using at that time, and you're missing out on performance. Once you clean this menu up, go ahead and hit the X on that, and let's type in game mode and make sure that we select Windows game mode, which is not the same thing as game bar, and make sure game mode is on. This is helpful because it'll turn off certain things like Windows updates or other optional updates from forcing its way through while you're gaming. One additional thing that you can do is type in settings. Go to personalization, colors, and turn off transparency effects. I would do this if you're really trying to get every last bit of ounce of power out of your computer. There's additionally a few more Windows settings that you can do. I'll share those in the comments that you can help kind of optimize Windows itself from running a bunch of stuff in the background that's not needed. Next, we're going to make sure we have mouse acceleration disabled. You can just type in mouse on Windows 11. It is going to be the first option you see here, enhance pointer precision. On Windows 10, you're going to find it under a menu similar to this one here. And it's going to be under pointer options. It'll be that checkbox right there. You want to have mouse acceleration off because essentially what it means is the faster you move your mouse in a jerking motion, the faster your speed is going to pick up, which means your sensitivity is always going to be changing. Let's make sure Windows is using the maximum amount of power that it can. On Windows 11 and Windows 10, you can right-click on the Start menu here and select Power Options. However, in Windows 11, it gives you a very different menu that you have to go through a lot more clicks. So I'm actually going to type in Control Panel. And we're going to click on Hardware and Sound. Then we're going to select Power Options. Under here, typically under Show Additional Plans, you're going to be able to see the High Performance Plan. If you have different things like exit lag or other software, you may see additional options in here which may be even better than high performance, but I would recommend to start here. You can click on Change Plan Settings to verify if the computer is going to go to sleep or not, I would not recommend computers to be set to sleep because sometimes certain things will not turn back on. Additionally, you can click under change advanced power settings, expand USB settings, USB select suspend setting, and disable this. What this could do, especially if you're playing on a controller, is essentially suspend USB settings or USBs on your motherboard that are not currently in use or that the computer thinks should be in sleep mode. We're going to open up the Nvidia control panel by right-clicking on the desktop. On Windows 11, you're going to click Show More Options. On Windows 10, you'll see it in the option here in this menu. Go ahead and select the Nvidia control panel. Under the Nvidia control panel, go over to Manage 3D Settings. And if you want to change this just for Battlefield, if you have different Nvidia settings per game, select Program Settings. Select the program you want to customize. In this case, it's Battlefield. Alphabetically, it's going to be near the top. Otherwise, you can click on Add and add the game. And you can update the settings that we're about to go through for just this game only. First option we have here is image scaling. Typically, most users are going to have this off. If you are on a lower end machine and are trying to just get a little bit more FPS, you could try enabling this setting to, let's say, 20%, and then in your in-game resolution in Battlefield 6, you can lower it to something lower than your native monitor resolution. The scaling will kick it in and essentially try to make the resolution or the image look better than the resolution that you're currently on. This is a bit of a complex way of doing things, but I would recommend trying this as a last effort, not as a first effort. So most users will have this as off. Next, we have ambient occlusion. Typically, I would have this off for both low and high-end machines. Unless you're making something cinematic, there's really no reason to keep this on. Anisotropic filtering, I would recommend to use as application controlled. This means that it'll be controlled by Battlefield 6 in-game settings. FXAA, I would recommend as off. Gamma correction on. Anti-aliasing mode, we also want to set that to application controlled as well, so that Battlefield can control that in-game. Transparency off. Background application max frame rate. I recommend to have this off. If you're on a lower end machine though and need to alt tab occasionally, you could turn this on so that the computer essentially isn't overdoing itself while you're doing another task on the unit. That really just depends on how much power you have and how much power you need. CUDA, I would set to all. Fallback policy, I would recommend either drive or default. DSR factors are a very neat thing. This I would recommend to have off and only turn this on if you're trying to bump up and do the exact opposite of image scaling. If you've got some room to maneuver and you want to make your game look even better, what you can do is you can turn this essentially on and use like a resolution that you don't normally have access to, like this one here. I have a 2K monitor, so one of the things I could turn on is 4K, which is 3840 by 2160. Even though my monitor is only a 2K, which is 2560 by 1440p, I essentially can play in 4K by using DSR factors. I would put the smoothness somewhere between 15 to 33%, somewhere in there. Once again, this is only used for if you have a lot of room and you're trying to make your game look better. Typically, the best use of this is if you have a 1920 by 1080 monitor and you're trying to play in 2K resolution, which is 2560 by 1440. If none of what I just said makes any sense, make sure you guys ask in the comments. Happy to help. Otherwise, for most users, especially if you're on a lower machine, this should always be off. Low latency mode, I recommend to have this as on, but this is a little bit of a personal preference and something you gotta play around with depending on your hardware. If you're on a higher end machine, you definitely can go up to ultra. A lower end, you can turn it off. Especially if you're experiencing FPS stutters, I would try this as off. It's a similar command to Nvidia Reflex inside of Battlefield. which is we're gonna review later, which is gonna be enabled plus boost on average, which is very similar to ultra. Max frame rate. I don't recommend having a max frame rate. This is another one of those things that can be a bit of a personal preference. If you're using GSYNC or FREESYNC, some people recommend that you put it at least 1 frame or 5 to 10 frames below your max refresh rate. So my monitor is 240 hertz, so I put it at least at 239 or maybe 5 to 10 below that. If you're at 144 hertz, at least put this at 143. And the point of that is so that you're never crossing the maximum refresh rate of your monitor. You're always below that. Personally, I like to have the higher FPS, even though I do use G-Sync, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I don't mind the occasional, very minimal input lag that you might experience. I think when you're looking at this type of gameplay or competitive FPS games in general, having a higher stable FPS is going to be more valuable to you with slightly higher latency. I personally recommend keeping this off if you're using G-Sync or FreeSync, but that is my personal preference. Monitor technology. This will only show up if you have a G-Sync or FreeSync compatible monitor, which I would definitely recommend to turn on if you do. MFAA, we want to have that as off. GDI and rendering, doesn't really matter if you change the options on those, so just leave those as auto and auto select. Power management mode, strongly recommend you have this one set to prefer maximum performance, though in your idling time you may notice your graphics card making more noise. Preferred refresh rate, you definitely want to use this once again as highest available, especially if you're using G-Sync or FreeSync. Shader cache size, this is really just a preference, but you need to have at least that amount available on your C drive. So I would recommend either 10 gigs or 100 gigs, though not a lot of people have 100 gigabytes available of free space at all times on their C drive. So I use 10 myself. One additional piece of information that's important: if you're using a newer monitor, you may need to plug in the USB 3.0, it looks kind of like a printer cable, in order to install the monitor drivers. And you may need to do that in order to maximize your performance of your high-end monitor. You also want to make sure that you're running in the highest refresh rate as well. So we've selected the highest to be available here, but we also want to make sure that it's the highest available already enabled. You can do that by clicking on change resolution and then looking at the refresh rate that is available. Anisotropic sample optimizations, I have this off. Negative LOD bias, I have this one as allow, but clamp is typically going to be your best option. Clamp typically provides a much better image quality and can reduce like texture aliasing or jagged edges or shimmering textures, but it is in correlation with anisotropic filtering to make the gameplay smooth. If you use allow, but also having anti-aliasing textures on higher ultra, it can help minimize the negative effects. Overall, clamp is the best option for visuals and smoothness, but if you're on a lower end machine, I would recommend to put this on allow. Texture filtering quality, I strongly recommend quality for most users. If you are on a lower end machine and need more performance, you can try performance or even high performance. This will cause a significant amount of visual quality degradation, so I recommend trying the other options first. If you have a super high-end beefy computer, then maybe go to high quality, but overall, generally you're going to sacrifice a lot more than you're going to gain. For the trilinear optimization, I have this as on, threaded optimization auto, and triple buffering off. It's really important that vertical VSync, you either have this as use the 3D application setting or off, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're using a G-Sync monitor or a FreeSync monitor, I would recommend to have this as use 3D application setting, which means it's going to fall back to whatever the game's setting is. Otherwise, you want to have this setting as off. Pre-rendered frames is 1. If you have this variable rate super sample, I would recommend to turn that off, and the last option there to auto. We're going to make sure that we've got resizable bar enabled. You can do this by clicking on system information. You're going to see it right here in the middle. If it's not enabled, you may need to enable that in your BIOS settings. If you've got questions on that, make sure to post your motherboard in the comments and we can help figure it out to see if resizable bar is possible or compatible on your motherboard. Additionally, if you're using a GSYNC or FREESYNC monitor, you're going to see an additional option here. You can select this. I would strongly recommend to enable it for windowed and full screen mode. As you see here in our Battlefield settings, we're going to review why borderless is the way to go. One additional thing that you can do if you're still experiencing stutters or hiccups is use something called the Nvidia Profile Inspector. It's extremely important that you get it from a reputable site. I will post the link that where I get it from in the description. Once again, I would only use this if you're experiencing stutters. Do not use this right off the bat if everything is running fine. You want to make sure you select the right profile. If you're using a game-specific one that we mentioned earlier, select the game-specific one from this list here. Otherwise, use the global driver profile here. And we're going to scroll down to common. As you see here, we have prefer max performance on, and then rebar is disabled by default. You can enable it, and I would just choose the bottom one that ends in a 1. And then click apply changes up here in the top right corner. A couple of additional things you can do if you're still experiencing FPS stutters or hiccups is to check your second monitor's refresh rate. So if you're running 2 different monitors on your computer, you can right click on the desktop, go to display settings, click identify. You can tell which monitor is which. So in this case, 1 is my secondary monitor. You can lower the resolution. Sometimes that can help if you lower it. So my second monitor is a 2K resolution. I could lower it to 1920 by 1080 to just get a little bit more performance. So it's not running a second monitor that I'm not using much while gaming in a higher resolution. That's one option. And the second thing here is advanced display. If you look at the Hertz refresh rate for that secondary monitor, let's say you're on 60, but you have the option of 59. I would try that 59 option just to see if it helps make your games run a little bit smoother. It is a little bit of an unusual issue, but I have seen this help quite a few users that are playing games and running into FPS stutters. The next thing you can do if you're on Windows 11 specifically is download something called HDR Calibration. If you have a monitor that supports HDR, I would highly recommend using this application. It is an amazing step up from Windows 10's HDR. However, Battlefield 6 at the moment does not appear to fully support HDR. You can do a calibration on your own. You can have this enabled. I currently have it off for somewhat of an unusual reason, but essentially it's because I make content and the colors are whitewashed when I transfer it from my gaming PC to my stream PC. But most users who are using standard HDR, this will visually look just fine for you. If you haven't tried HDR yet in games, HDR makes your games literally feel like you're in a movie. If anybody tried the Indiana Jones game with HDR, it was something spectacular and one of the most insane, visually appealing games that I've ever played in my life. We're going to make sure that Battlefield 6, anytime it's launched, is always running in a high priority. You're going to right click on the game, go to properties, and add -high. Right now, -novid does not currently do anything. I think it might be a command that has been sunset, but previously that used to remove the introduction video. It does not currently do that in Battlefield 6, but I would strongly recommend to do -high to set it in a high priority in Windows. Let's jump into some Battlefield 6 settings. We're going to start off by going to the cogwheel up here at the top. I recommend I have narration and subtitles off. I have my tinnitus SFX volume set to 40. What these essentially do is it controls the loudness of a high-pitched ringing sound that simulates ear damage from explosions. That's what tinnitus relief frequency is, which essentially just adjusts the pitch of the counter frequency designed to reduce the discomfort from that sound. Increasing this may make the ringing louder and more immersive, so it kind of depends on what you're looking for. At the moment, I don't have mine turned down, but that's essentially what it's used for. Let's take a look at mouse sensitivity next. You're going to find that under mouse and keyboard. Infantry mouse aim sensitivity is your essentially a look around sensitivity. I do like that they have some of this information over here on the right. This is the first time I've seen this in a game, but I really like this. This essentially is going to be your look around sensitivity, not your ADS sensitivity. To change that, let's go under control settings. And you're going to find this right here. Infantry mouse aim sensitivity, and then your zoom aim sensitivity. Zoom aim sensitivity is ADS aim sensitivity. I found this to be a little bit low. So depending on your setup, for me, 30 with my mouse settings is going to allow me to do roughly about a 360 on the middle to the left side of my mouse pad. So essentially half the mouse pad length, I can do a 180. The zoom sensitivity is much slower than that, so I have mine bumped up. I would strongly recommend to put this between 115 to 125. If you like a little bit faster speeds, maybe even bump it up to 150, but definitely a big preference. My mouse sensitivities that I use is Windows default, which is 6. Mouse acceleration, which we talked about earlier, is essentially off. I use a DPI of 800 with a 4000 Hertz pull rate. And then once again, in-game aim sensitivity at 30 with the zoom sensitivity of 115. Onto the graphics settings. This is why you're probably here. So let's dive right in. First, we want to set the performance preset and the graphics quality both to custom. This is going to allow us to customize the different graphics settings that we're going to see here in just a moment. I like the world brightness on 40. It's my preference. I haven't played around with these other ones a whole ton yet, but the game in general is very bright. So I would recommend turning it on a little bit, but that is a complete preference essentially. If we scroll down a little bit here as well, we've got field of view. I like 104, 103. I use in PUBG 103, and then Apex I use 104. So I want to find something very similar. But the higher the field of view, the more you're going to be able to see in your vision. Visually wise, you'll have targets that kind of appear a little bit smaller, but you'll be able to see more in your left and right. Vehicle third person field of view, I would recommend to max it out at 80. There's really no reason not to. Weapon motion blur, world motion blur, you definitely want to have those off unless you're really just trying to get that immersive feel. If you're playing the campaign, that's where that might be a nice thing to have on just for the visual effects. Otherwise, you definitely want to have that off, along with having camera shake as lowest as possible. Chromatic aberration, vignette, film grain. These are also one of those things that don't really have a big difference on performance, but just in general, I don't think they're necessary, and I recommend to have those off. Next, we're going to get into the display options. I recommend to use borderless. Typically in most games, as you see here, when you go to full screen, that you unlock your refresh rate. I strongly recommend, though, in this game that you use borderless. During testing, I found that full screen, which is typically the best option, especially if you're using GSYNC and FREESYNC. But in Battlefield 6, much better performance using borderless, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense compared to previous other games, but was definitely significant, which could be based on my hardware. In a nutshell, if you're able to obtain or maintain above your refresh rate in FPS without dropping below that, that's where I would go back to full screen. So in my case, if I'm able to maintain above 240 Hertz on my refresh rate, so 240 FPS, that's where I might go back to full screen. My computer does not handle 240 FPS in Battlefield 6. It's typically around 150 or so on the hardware that I have. So that's where I keep it at. So recommend, unless you have a wicked strong computer, borderless is the way to go. For vertical VSync, this is kind of the same thing. I'd recommend to have this as off unless you're using GSYNC or FREESYNC and can maintain above your refresh rates setting. One last thing to look at if you scroll down here is under advanced HUD settings. We want to make sure that I always lose it in here. Show compass in multiplayer is on. By default, this was on for me when I installed the game. This was not on by default in the beta. So extremely helpful, especially if you're calling out directions and things. I know you can ping, but it's also extremely helpful to have a vector as well. Back to the graphics settings. You're going to see that we skipped over this graphics quality settings option earlier here. We're going to double back to that. Under here, once again, you want to make sure that you have your graphics quality set to custom. If you have a high-end machine, texture quality and filtering, you can keep these on high or ultra. I definitely would not recommend using overkill. It's just not worth the sacrifice of the system for quality at that point, even if you have a high-end machine. So I recommend if you've got a nice machine to use high. If you're on a low-end machine, you absolutely want to keep the majority of these settings on low. Mesh, we're going to have this one on low. If you have a higher end machine, you can go up to high. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference though, so I also use low as well. Terrain, definitely want to have that on low. Undergrowth quality, low. Effects, this is one thing that can change depending on your preference. This is going to have a big impact. So overall, unless you're really going for the cinematic effect, I would recommend to have this one on low as well, on a low end or high end machine. Volumetric quality, if you're on a higher end computer, you could put this one on high. I still prefer it on low. It does give you a brief description of what it does over here. Another area where this could benefit you if you're on a low end processor but have a high end graphics card, you could turn this up just to get a little better visual quality. But overall, I think your best bet is to have it on low. Lighting quality, this one here, if you have a lot of VRAM, you can put this one on high. As you see here, it does have a high impact on that. We've got a lot of wiggle room, as we see here on the graphics card that I have. But once again, it's just not necessary. You can definitely turn this on low. It's going to give you more FPS and more stability. Local light and shadow quality, definitely want to have things on low. Things that move fast and have shadows aren't really that helpful in Battlefield. Things move too fast. People are moving around so quickly that being able to see a shadow of like a player is not really going to make that big of an impact. Once the Battle Royale comes out, that might change a little bit, but until that point, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Sun shadow quality, definitely want to have this on low. Shadow filtering, if you have a high-end computer, I would use PCSS, excuse me. If you're on a lower-end machine, I would recommend you use PCF. There's not a significant difference there, but overall, it's just going to be a little bit of a difference in overall processing power that you're going to get back. Reflection quality, definitely want to have this on low unless you're trying to do something cinematic. There's so many different reflections you can have that aren't going to actually benefit you in the game at all, other than the visual cinematic feel. Screen space reflections, same thing with that one. You could go on low. If you have a high-end GPU, you could go up to high just to get a little bit better visuals, but just overall, these really don't benefit you in any way at all, so I don't recommend it. Post-processing quality. If you have a great graphics card or a strong processor, you can keep this on a high or ultra, but otherwise I just keep it on low. Just overall performance of your gameplay and what's your FPS that you're trying to get out of the game. Smoothness, just keep it on low. Screen space, AO, and GI, I recommend just to have this as off. It really doesn't do a whole lot. It's just related to your ambient occlusion and different lighting. Unless you're trying to make a cinematic video, once again, it doesn't really have any real benefit. High fidelity objects. This one is very demanding on your CPU, especially if you're on an older machine. Definitely want to keep this on low. If you have a higher end machine, then I would check out, you know, maybe medium or high, because you're not going to see any real big positive impact there. Next, we're also going to double back to graphics and advanced. The first option we have here is fixed resolution scale. Definitely recommend 100. Even if you're on a higher machine, you can even bump this up to about, let's say 120, 130. I would recommend to keep it at 100 though. If you're on a lower machine, dropping it to like 80 can definitely improve your performance a little bit, but the visual impact, I would say, is going to be pretty great. Frame rate limiter, there's only really two areas that you want to have this on. I would say it kind of is the outliers. So if you're using GSYNC or FREESYNC and are able to maintain your refresh rate at a high level, this is where you might want to turn it on. Say if you want to cap it at, say, 239, if you have a 240 gigahertz refresh rate monitor and you're able to maintain 240 FPS at all times. Otherwise, you want to have it off. The second option would be if you're on a lower machine and you have some spikes of FPS that go above a certain number, you can cap this at the stable number to keep your game more stable. Next, we've got Nvidia Reflex low latency mode. We spoke about this earlier. Typically, you always want to have enable plus boost if available. If you're on a low-end processor but a high-end graphics card, this is really going to benefit you to have it on enabled plus boost. However, if you're on a lower-end machine, just having this on enabled would probably be the best way to go. If you're noticing that your game is still not keeping up, this would be one of those options that I would try running it on disabled, but it will increase your input lag at least a little bit. Upscaling technique. I recommend for most users to use DLSS with the upscaling quality of quality. If you're on a higher end machine, this is definitely the way to go, especially if you're using a Nvidia graphics card. If you're using an AMD graphics card, FSR is going to be the better option. One additional thing you can do if you're running on a lower end machine is to switch quality to either performance or ultra performance. This will definitely make the game, once again, look a little bit rough. It will definitely take away in the visual performance significantly. If you notice that your computer is crashing, your game is crashing, or it just isn't performing well still, one additional thing that you can do is turn upscaling technique off, and under anti-aliasing you can use FSR native AA to see if that works better for you. Overall though, I definitely recommend, if you've got the power for it, to use DLSS along with quality. If you're on an AMD unit, AMD FSR frame generation can help you there. It's, I would say, a mild impact. Future frame rendering, I don't recommend, but if you've got the higher end computer, you can definitely use that. Performance overlay, I recommend using the Steam one. We spoke about that earlier, but it's a preference. You can turn this on here, but I would recommend to keep that as off as well. As a side note here, if you do want to turn on the Steam-based FPS counter, you can go to Steam, the upper left corner, go to settings. We're going to select in-game. I would recommend, by the way, to turn off this use big picture overlay. That's something a little side quest there, along with changing your overlay key. I recommend using home. Honestly, it's a great key for this because shift tab is the current overlay. That's the default overlay command to pop up the Steam overlay in game. And shift is usually sprint, and tab is usually either push to talk or the scoreboard. So you're going to accidentally open up Steam often and it'll drive you nuts. Show performance monitor. We're going to see this right here. I would recommend to use top right. That's what I like to use. It shows up very nicely up there in the top right corner. And then you can change how much detail you want right here. I like the single value. It's simple, straightforward. One additional thing that I'd like to talk about is voice chat. You can find this under audio. Microphone mode should always be push to talk. If you are using an open microphone, that is something that you do in Discord, not in Battlefield. Please, for God's sake, save us all from hearing your entire life, your drama, your cooking, your smashing, your cleaning, your screaming. If you're going to disregard the suggestion and use an open microphone, please at least go through Windows microphone setup so that you can properly set up your microphone so we don't have to hear everything in the background. Nobody appreciates a teammate who is blasting all of their audio through their microphone. We want to hear footsteps. We want to hear callouts. We want to hear gunshots. Next, we're going to review Discord settings, which is something that I feel like is often overlooked. You know, now that most gamers have moved on from TeamSpeak or Ventrilo, Mumble, or Xfire. Thank God, I think I just dated myself right there. Let's go ahead and take a look at these settings. First, we're going to open up the user settings by clicking on the cog wheel. And we're going to go down to voice and video. Let's scroll all the way down to the bottom. And we want to uncheck this enable quality of service high packet priority. Don't need to have that on. Discord is not that important. Your games is more important when it comes to network process. Next, under the video tab, we scroll back all the way down, you're going to see video hardware acceleration. The only time that you really ever want to have this on, truthfully, and even then I would say questionable, is if you have a low-end processor but a high-end graphics card, that you want to off-put the as much stuff to your graphics card because it has more processing power that's free versus your processor that's under heavy load. That, or if you have a very high-end machine, it may not make really any difference at all. Next, we're going to click on the advanced option here, and then also turn off hardware acceleration right here as well. Next, let's take a look at keybinds. This part here is really important, especially if you are a content creator. I'm going to say this is a requirement if you're a content creator. Keybinds for streamers are a must, especially if you're playing with other content creators. Please, for God's sake, set this up. If you go down and you add a keybind by clicking on Add a Keybind, they're going to pop up right here, and I would recommend to do a push to mute. So I have mine set to mouse 4. I have 2 actually. So on my mouse, I have mouse 4 and mouse 3. Mouse 4 essentially mutes my microphone on Discord. My mouse 3 also mutes my microphone on Discord, but this is the button that I actually talk in game. So if I'm talking to teammates in Battlefield, PUBG, Apex, Counter-Strike, it mutes my Discord microphone only while I'm holding it, and then as soon as I let go, I'm back active on Discord. What that allows you to do in both of those buttons is you can talk to either your team or your chat without interrupting the people in your Discord. As a content creator, this is a must. One of the worst things that you can do is be blasting away, hey, thanks for the follow, or thanks for the donation, or thanks for the sub, or hey, how you doing today, to everybody that's on your team. It's just not professional. It's extremely annoying. Let's make sure that we support each other as content creators and don't do that. The last thing that I want to review with you here is the overlay. We're going to scroll down to game overlay. I don't recommend to have this on. Overlay is known to cause stutters, FPS drops. I strongly recommend disabling it, but it is a user preference. If you're playing in a big squad or a big group of people, that's really the only benefit that you can see who's talking. But I don't recommend having that on, so I recommend to turn that off completely. If you've got any questions about this stuff, please feel free to post in the comments. I'm happy to answer any questions, and then we can help figure out your issues from there. One last thing that's extremely important that is a must is to make sure that you have on Windows your extreme memory profile, also known as XMP profiles, enabled. This is something that's going to be unique to your motherboard, so make sure that you take a look at that. You can do it by right clicking on the taskbar down here and click on Task Manager. Click on Performance, go over to the Memory tab, and under the speed, you're going to be able to see what the speed is of your RAM. If you know your speed, let's say in my case, I know my RAM is allocated to 6200. If it's running at anything other than 6200, I know that it's not running at its normal fastest speed. Extreme Memory Profile, or XMP, does not overclock your memory. It only simply clocks it up to manufacturer spec. So it's extremely important that you have your memory profiles on. I would take a look in your BIOS, and you can get to your BIOS by, when you restart your computer, mash delete endlessly until you get into your BIOS. You have to look up online, depending on which motherboard you have, on where that option is to turn it on. If you're using a Asus motherboard, I would also recommend to turn on either AI Optimal or any other essentially a light overclock that Asus has designed on your motherboard. If you do this though, you do this at your own risk. I say this again, you're turning on an overclock that's different from XMP. You do this at your own risk. If your computer is crashing, you should turn it off. If you do enable AI Optimal or one of the other Asus or on your motherboard's built-in natural overclocking, typically you have to enable XMP again after that. So for me, when I enabled AI Optimal, I had to go back in and turn on XMP back to what it was before to actually make it run at its maximum performance, or the performance essentially that it is allocated to. Strongly recommend both those things. They can make a big difference, especially if you're on like a medium level or a slightly older computer. That extra little performance with the RAM running, or memory running at your maximum speed without going into like super overclocking is just a phenomenal benefit to have. So make sure that you do that. If you've got questions on that, make sure that you post your motherboard model number so we can help you, because every system is very different. If you guys haven't yet, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. It helps support this channel, videos like this, so I can keep making these for games as they come out. And let us know how your system is going. If you learned something new, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power, and we're all here to help each other make our games run as best as possible so we can get the most out of it. Enjoy Battlefield 6. I'm super excited for that battle royale that's coming out here in the near future, and I hope to see you on the battlegrounds.